In today's episode, I'm talking about kids who recognize letters and can possibly read even before they can speak, and this is called hyperlexia. And I'm going to talk about that today, if it's a sign of autism, and also what to do about it. Hi, I'm Dr. Mary Barbera, autism mom, board certified behavior analyst, and best-selling author of The Verbal Behavior Approach: How to Teach Children with Autism and Related Disorders. For some of you, you know that I was in denial for over a year when my husband first mentioned the possibility that my firstborn son Lucas had autism. And how you know this is because I tell the story a fair amount in my video blogs and also in my new podcast, which I started in January. And you can find out all about my podcast, subscribe to it, listen to the first couple episodes at marybarbera.com/podcast. I would love it if you would join me there. I did talk a little bit about this on my first podcast, and I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to let you know a little bit about hyperlexia. As I said, I was in denial, and what got me out of denial was I went to see another mom of a child with autism who was part of the Hyperlexia Association. So this was back in the late 1990s, and I just had my first email account, AOL. I was just able to search the internet, and I must have searched for Lucas had the ability to recognize letters, and he had a strong association memory. For instance, we went to Friendly's restaurant, and they had a welcome sign, WELCOME, and he would go up to the sign and he would say W, and then instead of saying E, he would say egg, because we must have had a puzzle with an E that covered an egg picture. And then he'd say L, and then he would say C, or he would say cat, another puzzle association. And so this made me feel like, well, at least he's using language. At this point, I had no idea how to teach him more language. I had no idea how to get him to echo my words or to fill in the blanks. I had no idea how to teach Lucas anything. But I must have been searching for the ability to recognize letters and found hyperlexia. And since I didn't want to admit that Lucas might have autism, I thought, well, maybe he has hyperlexia, not autism. And so I started searching, and I came across this woman who was local, and she allowed me to go to her home. I'll call her Nancy. And she told me all about hyperlexia. I didn't have Lucas with me on the visit. This was the spring before his 3rd birthday. And I told her that my husband mentioned autism as a possibility, but I was hoping it was just hyperlexia and a speech delay. And she told me about the LOVAS study and how kids with severe autism could recover with ABA therapy. And even if Lucas just had speech delays, or if it was very mild autism, I really needed to find out what they were doing for these kids with severe autism to recover them, to help Lucas the best. So on my way home, I got Catherine Maurice's 2 books, Let Me Hear Your Voice, and her second book, which was published in 1996, called Behavioral Intervention for Young Children with Autism. Once I had her 2 books, I read them very quickly and really realized that Lucas had autism just by reading the descriptions of kids. And so she was very helpful in getting me to at least look into the possibility of autism. Then I became a behavior analyst and started working with my own clients. And in 2010, I started working predominantly with the early intervention population, the 1 to 3-year-old children. And I remember one child, for instance, who was not speaking at all, not at all, but he seemed hyperlexic to me. And what hyperlexia is the ability to recognize letters and to read, to have a hyper awareness of letters and sometimes numbers, and to be able to read phonetically without any teaching. And this is what happened to several of my clients. They presented with hyperlexia. They loved letter puzzles. They could do puzzles much beyond their age level. They weren't speaking. So one of my clients, I'll call him Connor, he was only 21 months old when I got him. The parents were both in engineering, medical fields, and very intelligent. And I said, I think he's hyperlexic. And I explained how this was what I would consider a splinter skill. We want to use it as our advantage, but we really need to get him talking and not rely on this very much a splinter skill. So one day, just because I was curious, I wrote out the word apple, and I wrote out the word cat, and I wrote out the word, a few different things. And I put out pictures of the words, and then I handed him the word without saying what it was. I didn't say cat, match with cat. I just handed him the words and had him match, and he matched completely fine. And I said to the parents, to Connor's parents, I said, he can read, but this is a splinter skill. We really want to get him talking, and we can't focus on this. So the next week I go to see Connor, and they have him set up with a Mac computer in front of him, and they're like, Connor, type Barney. He was a big Barney fan too. So he would type Barney and then look up and smile. Type apple, and he'd spell and he'd look up and smile. I'm like, what about we're not focusing on this? Do you not understand? The reason why we don't want to focus on it is because actually hyperlexia can become an issue where kids are just so hyper focused on the stats to baseball or the letters or reading, but they don't have the language comprehension that goes with that skill. And so we want to focus on first things first. I, in my programming, use the VB map, which is by Dr. Mark Sundberg, and the BB Map Level 3 skills include reading, writing, and math, and that's for a 30 to 48 month old is when you'd want to start that. But for somebody with very poor language skills who's down in level 1, we do not want to be hyper-focusing on letters. Do you have to, if you have hyperlexia, do you have to have autism? Yes and no. When I was looking into hyperlexia, the expert said, well, you need to get him diagnosed with autism or PDD-NOS at the time. And I was like, well, I don't want him diagnosed with autism. I want him to have hyperlexia. And she basically told me that it was one and the same. But there are some experts, and I do know some very bright, precocious children who learn to read early, and they have normal social skills and normal language skills. So it could be a precocious child. But if you have very significant language disorder plus this hyperlexia with very poor language comprehension, it's probably autism plus hyperlexia. So just wanted to pop on here quick and talk a little bit about hyperlexia. Would love it if you would join me on my podcast and hear more about my journey, the lessons I learned, hear some interviews with moms and as well as professionals, really full of great information that might benefit you. So to learn more about my podcast, to listen, to subscribe, go to marybarbera.com/podcast. And I will see you right here next week.